Hi everyone, Miles with Hamilton Dog Training here, and today we're going to talk about how dogs learn. This is very important because all of our training is going to fall within one of these quadrants, and we have to understand what in our training we're trying to accomplish. So let's break it down here. If you're familiar with classical conditioning or operant conditioning, this is the same thing. But basically, in the top here, we have positive and negative. And then on the sides, we have reinforcement and punishment. And these things form a quadrant, and all of our training is going to fall into one of these four quadrants. So, positive reinforcement is the most common thing that we understand when we talk about dog training. First, let's break this down. So, positive is when you add something to the training, and negative is when you're removing something from the training. And reinforcement is when you do something because you want the behavior to happen more frequently. And punishment is when you do something because you want to cause behavior to happen less frequently. And so let's go ahead and talk about each one. So positive reinforcement, this would be adding things to the equation. This could be, treats. It could be, a ball. A toy is a reward. It could also be praise. And so you see what we're doing. So we're adding something to the equation because we want a behavior to happen more frequently, right? We ask for a sit, they give a sit, and then we give them a treat because we're reinforcing that behavior. All right, so for negative reinforcement, this is when you're removing something from the equation because you want something to happen more frequently. So this is a bit trickier to understand, but in training, what we'll do is the most common use of negative reinforcement would be leash pressure. So with leash pressure, what we'll do is, we'll ask for a sit, and then we'll have leash pressure. So we'll pull gently upwards on the leash, creating tension here. And then once the dog sits, we release that pressure, and then that reinforces the behavior of sitting. And so this is a common use of negative reinforcement here. And then positive punishment is when you're adding something to the equation because you want the behavior to decrease. So for positive punishment, this would be adding something. It could be like, a leash correction. It could be, your voice. You add something, you say no, you say right? And that would be positive punishment. And then negative punishment is a bit more rare in the training process, but negative punishment is basically when you're removing something because you want to punish a behavior. So this could be like, you're withholding treats, you're withholding a ball, you ask for a sit, you have treats, but then they don't sit, so you don't give them treats, right? So that would be negative punishment. And so this would be like withholding. And you have to be withholding something the dog values, right? If the dog doesn't value what you're withholding from them, it doesn't punish anything. And so understanding this is very important because when we're doing our training, when we're actively training our dog, all of our training is going to follow these things. So let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit more. So positive reinforcement, this is what we use to teach pretty much everything. So pretty much every new behavior, every new position, every new anything is taught with positive reinforcement. And then negative reinforcement is used to create obligation around high distraction environments. Because the problem with positive reinforcement, if you only train in this quadrant and you only are trying to motivate your dog to do things, if you only stay here, this whole thing is going to fall apart once your dog sees something else that they value more than whatever you have. So if you have, chicken and you have a ball and you're trying to do training, but then, you know, a squirrel runs by or another dog runs by. And if your dog wants to engage with that motivator instead of whatever you have, you've lost. And there's no way you can get it back, right? Like, for example, if you have a dog with high prey drive and there's a squirrel running by, or a small dog running by, or a little kid running by, and you're trying to motivate them with these things, but that flips the switch in their brain when they see, you know, what they perceive as prey, and it flips that, you know, hardwired switch in their brain. There's no way you're getting them back with this stuff. There's just no way. You've lost. You're limited if you stay here. And so in our training process, there's 2 steps to it. So to have a fully trained, reliable dog, you have to have both motivation and obligation. So to have a fully trained, reliable dog under any distraction that you can take anywhere, you have to have motivation and obligation. So positive reinforcement fits in the motivation category, right? We're motivating the dog to do certain behaviors, we're treating them, we're playing with them, or rewarding them, and that's how they're learning new behaviors, through motivation. Obligation is when you go to a busy park and you ask them to do something and then they don't do it, right? Just because they know how to sit in your living room, that doesn't help you, outside in the real world when you go and do things, right? They have to listen to you everywhere. So you have to have both. You have to have motivation and obligation. And we get motivation and obligation through these things. So motivation comes from here, obligation comes from here, here, and here. And what you'll see in your training process is that about 20% of the training is motivation. That's like the very easy part. You're teaching them new behaviors, it's fun, it's exciting, it's easy, right? Because they're picking up new commands super fast. That's super easy. Anybody can do that. The hard part is obligation. So in your training process, on your way to have a fully trained dog, it's gonna be about 20% motivation and 80% obligation. This is the hard part. This is the part where almost everybody fails. And so this is important to understand, because in our training, that's what we're going to be creating later on in the process as we go to more distracting environments in the real world, and we're putting our training to the test. It's just important to understand. All right, so that's the majority of all the training. All of our active training is going to fit within this box here. But there's one more very important thing that doesn't fit in this box at all. And that is the relationship. So your relationship is not something that you actively train. It's kind of a way of living with your dog. And I'll make a separate video on relationship, but this here is most important. If you don't have a relationship, a solid relationship with your dog, they're not gonna listen to you anywhere. But if you do have a solid relationship with your dog, they don't even have to be trained, and they'll listen to you. They'll follow you around, they'll respect you, they'll look to you for guidance. And so the relationship is something that you build through your interaction with your dog, and I'll explain that more in depth in a later video. But for now, this is how dogs learn. So understand it, because in our training, we're going to be using each one of these quadrants, and you have to understand where we are in our training process and why we're using the tools in our training that we're using. All right, that's it for this one.